To keep this conversation going, though, bringing onto the program now here a couple of guests. The first one being Brian Rotella, who joined us earlier today before we had the actual verdict, as well as legal affairs journalist, friend of the program here, Meghann Cuniff. Good to see both of you.
Good to see you.
Morning.
All right, so a lot happening here, a lot of big moments that we are tracking. Meghann, I want to start with you, though, because we were talking to Brian a little earlier on today. I have to get your thoughts. You have been covering this trial extensively, as you do with a lot of these entertainment industry trials. What is happening out there? I mean, I'm here at work. What is the internet saying right now? And when we think about it, the jury reaching a verdict in just 3 days, it's a small amount of time in comparison to how long we've been watching all of this go down.
Yes, I think normally an acquittal like this in a case this size in a federal case is surprising. But I think a lot of people who are watching the trial, and especially people at the courthouse, predicted this. A lot of people thought that the transportation for prostitution charges were really kind of inescapable, because the prosecutor even emphasized in her closing that Diddy can be convicted of that is illegal even if everyone enthusiastically participates. And of course, prosecutors' point was that not everyone wanted to participate, that Cassie and Jane, the women, were not willing participants in this. But just the point that even if they were, it's still illegal, I think it made those convictions hard for him to escape. But there really was a question over whether he used fraud, force, and coercion to force Jane and Cassie Ventura to have these encounters. And there were so many videos of the encounters, so many text messages surrounding the encounters, that I think the defense did a really good job of highlighting the fact that there was a lot more going on here than prosecutors were showing the jury.
All right, Meghann, echoing a lot of what Brian was saying before we had that entire list of those charges. So Brian, I want to get your thoughts on that too, because we were wondering what this was going to come down to. On the screen, I am going to put up this. So we do have a list here. I just want to break them down here for the viewers. At count 1 there, racketeering, conspiracy, not guilty. Let's talk about the 2 that he was found guilty in. So those 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. What's Diddy looking at this moment when it comes to those guilty verdicts?
Mr. Combs has to be breathing a huge sigh of relief. There's just no other way around it. Ultimately, what this jury came up with, from my reading, is this was about sex for money, not sex by coercion, and certainly not sex by a criminal enterprise. So that's what transportation over state lines for prostitution. It really has nothing to do with the mindset of the victim in this case, Cassie or Jane. It has to do with the mindset and the intent of Mr. Combs, which is he was transporting people to have sex. That ultimately it certainly is a serious crime, but it doesn't carry the 30 to life that the RICo claim would have carried. And as we were talking about before the verdict, it just to me was a clear case of over prosecuting and overcharging on that RICo claim, especially for this jury to try to piece all these different things of evidence together to create this criminal enterprise. I am a little bit surprised with what you just mentioned and our other guest about the videos and the text, that they didn't determine that there was coercion, force, or fraud in some way or another for especially Cassie and Jane to feel they needed to have sex in these freak-offs. And they ultimately determined that it was about being transported for money and ultimately to have these sex acts. So to me, what ultimately this will carry, back to your question, is somewhere in the neighborhood of likely, it carries 10 years. That's the maximum penalty. I don't think that it's going to be consecutive. I think that the default here is going to be they will run concurrently. So for your audience, that means that it will be a maximum of 10 for both offenses. I think the judge is going to determine, even though they are different individuals, it arises out of the same course of conduct. So I think that the maximum that Mr. Combs is looking at is 10 years. When you compare 10 years to life in prison, it's just got to be a huge sigh of relief for him. And ultimately, it was an excellent job by his attorneys. His attorneys basically made the case that he has a very strong interest in sex, that he is a voyeur, but he is not someone running a criminal enterprise, and he was not someone doing this by force. They also really put these witnesses on the stand, and it seems the jury felt that these witnesses were not coerced. I do think that some of the settlements and some of the money that came in was likely compelling evidence to this jury saying what really were the motives of especially Miss Ventura and ultimately the witness known as Jane. Were their motives in some way or another driven by money, right, wrong, or indifferent? I think that's why the jury came down with what we do know is that Mr. Combs had the intent to transport these women for purposes of prostitution. We cannot, beyond a reasonable doubt, which is our standard, come up with anything else.
Brian, going off of that answer and heading back over to Meghann for this response, I do want to put up a post from you, Meghann, because you have been tweeting really consistently here, where you say this is a staggeringly big loss for federal prosecutors. Not guilty on both the RICo and trafficking counts is as bad as it can get for them. When is their press conference? I mean, that's what we're wondering here too. Meghann, what are you looking forward to hear from prosecutors? What can they say at this point when facing this loss?
And of course, the last line was a bit of a sarcastic comment, because I would not expect them to hold a press conference like this. I mean, it's very traditional that the U.S. Attorney's Office only advertises their wins. They don't really talk about their losses here. And right now, of course, prosecutors are focused on the request that Diddy be released from jail today. His lawyers are saying they want him out on bail today, and the judge is considering that. And just given what Brian was saying about the few years he actually faces in prison on these charges, I think the judge has a tough decision in front of him about he has a pretty good case that he should not have to go back to the MDC today. They even said Diddy doesn't want to have to go back to the MDC. He wants to walk out of the courthouse that day. We'll see if that actually happens. It seems like even if they do grant some kind of bail, he's going to have to go out back to the jail to be booked out or something like that. But there is a serious question of whether they're going to hold him in custody pending sentencing here.
We're just taking a live look here just outside of the courthouse. You could see several dozens of people there gathered. They were hoping to get some comments there by Diddy. I'm sure some people are waiting to see what he's going to have to say. Doubt we're going to hear maybe anything from him today. Let's go back to Brian and what Meghann was saying and what we're watching out for next, because Diddy's lawyers are arguing that he should be let out on bail, at least until the sentencing phase of this entire trial. But we do know that prosecutors are saying that Diddy is a flight risk. So how is the judge going to weigh both of those kind of options there when finally deciding what to do here?
But first of all, I couldn't agree with Meghann more. I don't think we're going to see Mr. Combs today. I think he's going to get booked, at least not in the next couple hours. I think he's going to have to go back to jail to get booked. And then if you do see him, it will be after that. But back to the question that you're asking, ultimately, my belief is that in this type of case, if this was Mr. Smith would be out on bail. The only way that Mr. Combs ends up in some way having to not be out on bail and is ultimately has to wait for his ultimate sentencing is that the judge determines that this is an incredibly special circumstance because he is Sean Combs, he is P. Diddy, and that he has the ability and all these different resources where he could ultimately embarrass the court with what he would ultimately do, whether it would be to get on a jet, whether it would be, he's going to have restrictions. So for the audience, let's be clear, he's going to have some types of restrictions, even if he's let out on bail. I heard one of the other commentators mentioning that he may be having to stay in New York, not go to Florida. Those are the types of reasonable restrictions. But the idea that if this was Mr. Smith would be out on bail, Mr. Smith would right now be going and being booked, and obviously there wouldn't be a press conference and all the attention that we're getting. The only question for this judge is this an extremely special circumstance with Mr. Combs because of all of his resources? And well, candidly, he embarrassed the court and ultimately embarrassed the process. I think the judge is going to treat this more like right down the line, which seems like what this judge has done, and that you are going to hear that Mr. Combs is going to be let out on bail.
Meghann, I see you here nodding your head along with what Brian is saying and what we can expect coming up next in terms of the future as well. I also want you to set the stage here for our viewers and talk about really what kind of impact we can expect for this entire trial to have on Diddy, his life, his legacy. Again, he was not found guilty on those really serious charges, but still guilty on 2 of the 5 counts. So what do you think in terms of how Diddy may want to even bounce back, or what he's going to be doing with his enterprise going forward.
This does seem like the kind of thing that he's going to have a team of people advising him on, the best way to kind of re-enter public life. Because one thing that was apparent during this trial was that, he has a lot of things in his background that are pretty unsavory and that really don't make him look like a very good guy. And one point during the trial was the video of him assaulting Cassie was considered so bad that he was actually committing acts of bribery to try to keep it out of the public realm because he was worried that would ruin his career. It's like, well, that's already out in the public realm, and so is all this other stuff. And it's just kind of a question of, how does the public respond to this? Are they going to welcome him back at the Grammys, at major award shows, or is this always going to be hanging over his head? And I think it'll be an interesting test of celebrity culture and American society to see where Diddy fits in now that he's been declared not guilty of some really serious charges. But America's also seen some pretty heinous evidence about unsavory acts he's engaged in.
Moving there with your point, Meghann, I want to put up this. It's a post, and it includes the statement that was released by Cassie Ventura's lawyer here. So it gets cut off a little bit, but I am going to read it in full because this was such a major moment in this entire trial. Meghann, you posted this on X. It says, quote, "This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November 2023. Although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial. She displayed unquestionable strength and brought attention to the realities of powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that has persisted for decades without repercussion. This case proved, that change is long overdue, and we will continue to fight on behalf of survivors." Brian, I want to give some of these survivors a moment here, because I know that a lot of the focus is on Diddy, but at the same time, people were really kind of looking at this trial and what some of the witnesses had to go through. What would Cassie do next? Is she over and done with this? Or even so, maybe some of the other witnesses who had also accused Diddy of similar things?
It's a great question. Let's back up for a moment. Miss Ventura did have this civil lawsuit. That's how this all started. And there was a substantial award that she received. Now, that is not in any way ultimately redress for what happened. And again, I talked about it before the verdict. That video is something that's going to live at the first line of the memory of Sean Combs. I just don't know how it won't with that being out there. But back to Miss Ventura and to these other victims, I do think, and for your audience, let's remember, what's a civil lawsuit? A civil lawsuit, like what Miss Ventura brought that prompted this, it's about money. And these allegations can be very similar, but it ultimately carries a different burden. It carries what's called a preponderance of the evidence, which is a legal wonky term for all you got to do is tip the scales a little bit. Here, in a criminal case where you're taking away someone's life or liberty, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's why that standard is so much higher. In these civil lawsuits that Mr. Combs has faced, including the lawsuit with Miss Ventura, what you're seeing, and I think that you're going to see more of these, and my prediction is we may see a lot more of these lawsuits, including against Mr. Combs. They will be civil lawsuits seeking money for this type of activity. And ultimately, that's going to be the forum where you're going to see some type of redress, some type of satisfaction for these victims. I think what we're finding here, and prosecutors and potentially these prosecutors are finding, these are extremely challenging cases to bring when you're going to be taking someone's life or liberty away. All that said, he's still going to be facing up to 10 years in prison for transportation related to prostitution. I just think that for the future and for victims, you are going to see a lot more trial lawyer civil lawsuit activity than you're going to see criminal prosecution activity, because there's no question, whatever these prosecutors say, this was a loss for them. And the second loss is going to come when I do believe they're ultimately going to let Mr. Combs out on bail while he's waiting for sentencing.
So as we continue to take a live look here just outside of that courthouse, there are several images coming in. kind of a chaotic scene because everyone is reacting to this verdict. Meghann, I want to go back to you, though, as someone that has, again, like how I stated in the beginning of our conversation, covered so many of these trials and these legal affairs with several of these people in the entertainment industry and kind of what goes on next. And forgive me if this is too general of a question, but still, with all of the reporting that you've done, with so many cases, what stuck out to you particularly with this Diddy trial throughout the entire process, and even going back to when we first had that video of Diddy assaulting Cassie?
What stuck out to me about the trial was the huge interest from independent media, from YouTubers, bloggers that were outside of the courthouse streaming all the time. And there's so much interest in the few public seats in the courthouse, the overflow courtroom. And while I think the New York federal courthouse has had bigger stakes trials than this, just in terms of global impact, political impact, I don't think they've really seen a trial of this celebrity magnitude, just with the crowds outside the courthouse and the independent media. And already I've seen some posts on Instagram from people celebrating the fact that independent media predicted this verdict. And it is true that they have been calling a not guilty for forever. And a lot of people would say that's because they're driven by kind of a fandom here, but also they will defend this and say that they've been giving a more objective look at this than maybe some of the mainstream media. We get kind of such a high level view from mainstream publications that really can't get into the details the way the independent journalists can when they're just talking into their YouTube lives.
That's a very interesting point that you mentioned there, Meghann. See, that some things that people don't even really think about, the impact that this has had in so many different facets of life. Maybe a question for both of you. What do you think this trial as a whole, what kind of major change may come about because of how this was covered, what we saw happening there, and more specifically, really the serious nature of several of these charges and the big names attached to it? And Brian, I'll start with you.
I think that the biggest thing is, if anyone remembers that movie from, I think, the early 2000s with Jim Carrey, The Truman Show, where everything was being videoed at all times and everything was omnipresent with public eyes, that's what this trial was to Meghann's work and what she's done. You've had eyes everywhere, all over the world on this case. You've had people out in social media blogging on this case. I think that the real effect is going to be, getting back to what I was saying before, is, remember, it's tax dollars that go when prosecutors are bringing these cases, and these are not inexpensive cases to bring. So they ultimately have to justify when they bring these cases that the money was worth what was being spent. And I think as the world's changing and you're getting all of these different eyes on these cases, which gets back to this jury. Remember, a big issue, not a lot of people are talking about this right now. This jury was not sequestered. And there's a question in the legal community and trial lawyers like me, can you sequester a jury now where they actually won't get information? Even if they get the admonishments like this jury did, they went home. How many people actually believe, and I'm not trying to put any, cast any dispersions about this jury, but how many people believe these folks didn't actually get some information during the time in the course of this trial? I think the impact of this is going to be on prosecutions. And prosecution is going to have to say, we have got an open and shut case. And also, what is the open and shut case about? Do we have it on sex trafficking? Do we have it on transportation of prosecution? I personally think, I don't know what Meghann believes, but I personally believe if that RICo claim had not been in there, and I really do feel that confused at least some of these jurors, there is a potential that Mr. Combs would have been found guilty of the sex trafficking charge, at least as to Miss Ventura. And I keep going back to that awful video that you mentioned, where it's just videos speak 1,000 words. So I do think prosecutorial offices, both at the federal level and at the state level, are looking at this case, especially high-profile cases. And I think these are going to go through very, very tight filters going forward.
Meghann, again, I see you nodding along back here with Brian and all the points that he's making, kind of piggybacking off of what he just said here, because he mentioned some moments that he feels are not being talked about regarding this entire case. Do you feel the same way, maybe with some points that you think that more people should have eyes on? Because, we've been talking about this a lot, but there are blind spots.
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, it's tough because I've noticed that so much of the discussion is about what people think the jury is going to do. I mean, the last couple of days, everybody just wanted to speculate about what they think the jury is going to do. And I wanted to be like, hey, I want to take a few minutes and actually pre-write my story so I have some background on the witnesses. I mean, all the transcripts are available and there were a lot of witnesses and all the exhibits are available. And I feel like we as the media don't have a very good way of getting that all out to the public. For a lot of people who have been to the trial every day, if you looked at the work they were doing, you would have no idea they've been at the trial every day. And it doesn't reflect the fact that the transcripts are available, the exhibits are available. We as the media are kind of failing as a filter of all this public information when the entire trial is just dumped at our fingertips, and we just spend our time kind of speculating about things instead of really like putting forth information. I wish there was more focus on what the witness said instead of what we think the jury is going to do. But there were, I'm kind of going through it now. There were a lot of big moments for prosecutors and witnesses, and I think it goes to the point about maybe the racketeering charge distracted the jury from the real crime of sex trafficking. They were talking about drug distribution crimes and bribery and arson that was really just kind of loosely related to the trafficking, and perhaps that distracted him. But there are a lot of witnesses to look through and a lot of evidence that was put forth before the jury.
That is really a good point there, Meghann, because so much of the focus was the verdict. We just want to get to the end and failed to really take in that entire process as a whole and all of the information that has been dumped to all of the viewers and really the journalists covering this case. Back out live there once again, just outside of the federal courthouse. I do want to thank both of you. You've been on with us here for about a half an hour now, kind of dissecting this major breaking news story here involving Sean Diddy Combs. I do want to get final thoughts, though, before I let you go. Brian, we'll start with you. Anything you would like to mention?
I'll just say it again. Mr. Combs and his team have got to be huge sigh of relief, which is really weird to say when he's going to be facing up to 10 years of federal custody. But he has got to have a huge sigh of relief. And candidly, I'd have to finish on, there are victims in this case. And back to the point that Meghann was making and that you were just making, I think we get so caught up in like the polls and politics, we get so caught up in what a jury is going to decide that we lose what actually may have happened. And that video spoke 1,000 words, and I hope that doesn't get lost in all this.
And then Meghann, same question to you. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm wondering what this is going to do to the U.S. Attorney's Office and what kind of reckoning they're going to be going through, because this is a big loss for them. And while they do have the 2 convictions, it's just not the case that they were hoping for. And with just all the political implications in D.C. and the changes in the U.S. Attorney's Office, you just wonder what the prosecutors are looking at right now and what they're going through. But I think, as Brian said, that it's important to remember that there are victims in this, and that, I mean, he was committing some crimes by doing this interstate lines transportation for prostitution, and that this is a lot more widespread than we think. So it's kind of a question of, is America going to try to deal with this? Is Cowboys for Angels due for a reckoning? Are they under investigation? Or is Diddy just going to be kind of made an example of this crime that nobody else really gets prosecuted for?
Well, I want to thank you both once again here. Brian Rotello, attorney there, kind of dissecting these charges, what may happen to Diddy. But Meghann Cuniff, a legal affairs journalist, someone that has really been in the thick of this coverage ever since it started. We appreciate both of your times. And even though we have a verdict today, I know that there's still so much that we need to follow up on. So we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.